We know there are many choices in internet radio, and the staff and host of LA Talk Live would like to thank you for choosing the internet's hottest destination for the most eclectic sound and invigorating talk. This is LA Talk Live. We are more than just talk.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute, Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health. I'm your host, Joshua Lane, and you're listening to us today on the LA Talk Live radio network. Our guest is Geraldine Saunders, who wrote a book called The Love Boats, which gave rise to the TV series The Love Boat, which ran for 9 seasons, one of the most popular TV series worldwide. And Geraldine's work also dramatically increased the amount of people who went on cruises. Some people feel it's maybe as much as 5,000%. Geraldine, as a young woman, was a fashion model, worked for Mr. Blackwell, among others, and has had a long career in Hollywood and seems to know everybody. Geraldine Saunders, welcome to Here's to Your Health.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm actually very thrilled to have you on. And I guess we should talk just first about your book and your work with The Love Boat, which, again, ran 9 seasons. I mean, that's an accomplishment.
Yes, I can't believe how lucky I've been. I was a fashion model for so many years, 20 years, and then I was getting older, and I thought I have to find a new career. So I think because my mail outnumbers anyone else's at Princess Cruises, they finally called me in for an interview, and they asked me if I could do all these things. And no matter what they asked me, languages, anything, I could do that. So, excuse me. With a lot of little lies, I got my job on board as a hostess, and then I became the world's only female cruise director.
Right, you were the first.
You were the first,
right.
And being a cruise director, you're in charge of the morale of the passengers, and you're in charge of all the activities in all the public rooms from the minute they wake up until they go to bed at night. So you hardly get any sleep. And but I noticed that when people boarded the ship, they changed. That they let their protective walls down, and they felt very loving toward each other. Everyone was accepted, and I thought, people on land, if everyone could go on a cruise, there wouldn't be any wars, because everybody was just loved everyone. I think it's the motion of the ship that makes them put their protective walls down. So, excuse me, I wrote home to my family, "Dear family, you'll never believe what happened today." And I would be observing people. And after I wrote my mother sent my letters to a publisher, and it was made into a book called The Love Boats. I thought I would never, ever be able to write a book because I can't spell, and I'm dyslexic. But The Love Boat was very successful. And then I made a treatment and registered with the Writers Guild. It only cost $10 then. And I was able to have it made into a TV series. Well, first it went into a movie of the week, and then that was so successful, we made Love Boat number 2, and then we went into series. And ran for almost 10 years. Excuse me. And all that time I was just thanking the universal intelligence for my luck and everything. And I joined the symphony in Glendale at the board of directors, and I met this lady named Sheila Farrell Murray, and so we became just knowing each other on the board, kind of friends. And her husband passed away, and she was bored, and she said, "What will I do?" And in the middle of the night, she came to her, "I think I'll see if Geraldine Saunders would like me to write her biography." So she called me, and I said, "Sure." So for about a year, she came over, and it caught me off unawares, and I would tell her all these things that really happened above and below decks, and all the things, all my secrets that I didn't really want to let out. She seemed to pull them out of me, and so she wrote this book now that just came out this week. It's called The Love Boat Lady, and it's on Amazon.com. Oh. And it's kind of shocking, but it's all true.
Well, you've had a very interesting life. You were born in California.
I was born in Glendale, California, and lived there all my life.
Right. And your dad used to own a restaurant gas station combination? Is that what it was in the 30s?
It was a service station and garage in Tehunga. That's when everyone used to go up there for. They had a lot of sanitariums for people that had tuberculosis. And a lot
So
of
we're
people,
talking now 20s, 30s, or teens, 20s, 30s?
That was my grandma was a pioneer up there, and that was in 1909. But my daddy, he was there during the Depression, and he died in 1933.
And by the way, you did say that your dad died. Was it because he had infection from a tooth that wasn't pulled properly?
Yes.
Is that the reason? Because a long time ago, the medicine isn't what it is today, and so sometimes you don't know what people passed away from. But is that your thinking? That's why your
Yes.
dad passed away?
Yeah.
From an improperly pulled tooth?
Yes. They didn't have antibiotics in those days, of course. And the unusual thing that happened, we had a dog that barked, but we had never heard him howl. But one night, my daddy had been in the hospital far away for about a year. And one night we heard this, Jiggs, his name was Jiggs, started howling. The most incredible howl. And he howled all night and he wouldn't stop. And the next morning we got a telegram that my daddy had died. Now, how did that dog know?
Well, you're involved with these kind of subjects. You were involved with Sidney Omar, were you not, for many years?
Yes, I do his column now.
Yes. You do his column.
Yes.
And you are syndicated throughout the United States.
Yes, with Tribune Media Services.
Right.
No, throughout the world.
Throughout the world.
I'm even in Dubai.
Oh, Dubai, it's very nice. I've never been there. Is it lovely in Dubai?
I haven't been there either.
Yeah, it must be. It's brand. I guess everything's brand new there. It must be very lovely. So this subject. So with the death of your dad, and the dog in the house howling, how do you interpret that?
That there's so much we don't know.
Right.
The more we know, the more we realize that we really don't know anything.
Right. No, I think that seems very fair, doesn't it? That's a very fair statement. Mm-hmm. Some things you just can't explain. You might be inclined to laugh at some things because you don't understand them, but you just don't understand them. And so you write about astrology, and you continue to do that, which is now a subject that people pay attention to astrology. They always have. They find it interesting.
The papers don't like to carry it. But the minute they let it out accidentally, they have so many phone calls that they have to carry it.
Why the papers think it's somehow wrong?
Well, they're just not. They don't realize it's
power.
That so many people are reading it, so they have to carry it.
Right. And Sidney, you were married to Sidney Omar, were you not? Very briefly.
He was a genius, and I learned all his secrets. So I can. Last Saturday, Buddy Hackett's widow hired me to come read palms at her house. So I use numerology and astrology, and I read their palms. And I do it every year. And it's amazing that what you can tell, how you can help your life if you know what cycle you're in. Like the Libras have had Saturn there for the last couple of years, and they've had a lot of pressure. And I understand you're a Scorpio.
I'm a Scorpio, yeah.
So maybe 5 years ago, for a couple of years, you had a lot of pressure. And but that's leaving now. So if you know that, you know when to lie low and you know when to press ahead, and you can understand your children and understand your boss and understand yourself, and maybe some days you realize that it's a new moon, it's a good time to start new things and plant things.
I mean, after all, so astrology is simply kind of a framework. It kind of offers you some guidance.
Yes.
Isn't it? It offers guidance, and you can reject it if you wish, but it offers guidance. I found working with skilled astrologers that they've always been very helpful.
Yes, it doesn't... They're just a synchronicity between as above, so below. It's not causal.
Right.
It's just a synchronicity.
I've worked with Brenda Brush, who's an excellent astrologer in Hollywood, Florida, and I've worked with Iris Salzman in North Miami, Florida, and those women were remarkable, and they're so remarkable. I'm happy to mention the names on the air because I'm somewhat of a skeptic, and their information that they offered was so accurate. It was so accurate that not only did I benefit from what they told me, but for me, who I'm somewhat fixed, it made me realize it was a much bigger universe than I previously suspected. So Iris Salzman, Brenda Brush, even Jill Dane, the daughter of Mickey Dane, I worked with her as clients. I was a client for these three, and they were remarkable. They were just on the money. It was impressive.
Well, Wrigley, I think her name was, was Nancy Reagan and Ronnie Reagan's astrologer.
Right, they had an astrologer. Right.
For 8 years when they were in the White House.
And I remember that the Reagans were criticized for that, and I thought, well, whatever, I have no problem with it.
Well, Roosevelt used Mr. Howe, and he told him when to be seen and when not to be seen, and helped his career.
Yeah, just guidance. To me, it doesn't seem I have no problem with it. Some people do, of course, and okay, it's a free country, so if you don't want to use it, you don't use it.
That's because they haven't. It's not a belief. You have to accept it. The only ones that don't accept it are those people who haven't studied it.
Right. Okay, that seems very fair. Mm-hmm. And so you are a Virgo, so you're involved with the healing arts.
Yes, I had my birthday yesterday, and so
You want to tell us how old you are?
I danced all night.
You want to tell us how old you are? You want to give that away? No.
Well, thank you for the pause. I'm doing a big fashion show on the 9th, which is next Sunday at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel for the World Peace, and I'm going to be modeling it, as I always do. I'm considered the world's oldest model because yesterday I was 89 years old.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. And so as a young girl, you worked, later on you worked for Mr. Blackwell, did you not?
I was Mr. Blackwell's first model, and he became my dear friend for the rest of his life.
And he was very popular for a long time.
He was very talented. I loved his clothes, and all the ladies loved his clothes. They were very flattering.
And he was a well-known fashion designer, in the 50s and 60s or 60s?
50s and 60s.
50s and 60s.
And 70s.
And then, of course, by the 70s, he became known for his acid tongue on TV. Yes. And it was very funny, actually, and he ran for a long time with that.
Yes, with his worst dressed list and his best list.
And to a large extent, Joan Rivers is kind of stole some of his material, kind of doing the same thing that he did.
Is she?
Well, she comments on actors and how they dress, and of course, Joan is actually pretty funny too. But really, the precursor to her, or the forerunner, was really Mr. Blackwell, who would, with a very straight face, make fun of certain celebrities. And I always thought it was very amusing, really.
Well, I think the reason I'm able to model now, even though I've been modeling for so many years, is that I don't eat sugar.
Right.
So I have the same figure I had when I was modeling years ago.
And not eating sugar, from my perspective, would be the single smartest thing that anyone can do to maintain their vitality.
Yes.
And as an author, you have a number of books out. You also wrote 2 books on hypoglycemia, which also sold very well.
Yes, and it's considered the stepchild of medicine because there isn't any money in it.
That's right. There's no money in it, right?
It's a do-it-yourself disease. You just have to stay away from sugar.
Right. It's very simple. Right. Stay away from sugar, and in general, you do pretty well. Right.
Yes.
Exactly. And that was co-authored with Harvey Ross, the MD.
Yes. He's passed away now.
What was the title of that book?
The first one was called Hypoglycemia, the Disease Your Doctor Won't Treat. Right. And then I did a follow-up on it called Hypoglycemia, the Complete Healthcare Handbook. By Kensington Publishers.
Those books, I remember those titles when they came out, and those books were influential. So you've had influence in the showbiz community, in the fashion community, and in the wellness community. So very few people have had that kind of success. You really have had a lot of success, really. It's rather remarkable. For those of you just tuning in, we're chatting with Geraldine Saunders, author of a book called The Love Boats, which gave rise to the TV series The Love Boat, which ran for 9 seasons. And we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Geraldine Saunders after these important messages.
Walk, run, climb, play. Solgar number 7 can help. Feel the difference for yourself. Solgar number 7 actually shows improvement in joint comfort within 7 days. Now you can start to get back on track fast and pursue the activities you love. Solgar number 7 is a breakthrough in joint care with no glucosamine and no chondroitin. The advanced bioactives in Solgar number 7 help to increase flexibility, mobility, range of motion, and actually shows improvement within just 7 days. 1 capsule, once a day, is all you need. When stiff joints occasionally say no, Solgar number 7 says yes. Visit Solgar.com and learn more about Solgar number 7 today. That's www.solgar.com, www.solgar.com. Solgar number 7, official sponsors of Here's to Your Health with Josh Lane and LA Talk Live.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute. Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
We're back. You're listening to Here's to Your Health. I'm your host, Josh Lane, and you're listening to us today on the LA Talk Live radio network. Our guest is Geraldine Saunders, author of the book The Love Boats, which gave rise to the Love Boat television series. Also with us today in studio is the author of the biography, Sheila Murray, the author. And both these women are longtime residents of Glendale, California. Shout out to Glendale. So, by the way, were your mom and dad born in California?
No, my mother was from Pennsylvania. My daddy was from Iowa.
Okay.
My grandparents were from, excuse me, Ireland and Alsace-Lorraine.
Because some people, you do meet a few Californians who've been here longer than 15 minutes. They've actually been here 2, 3, 4, 5 generations. And that's kind of impressive here in California. I think California now, we have more than 10% of the population of the United States. Everybody wants to live in California. It's just the best place, California. So we're here. And also, let us give the website for Geraldine, and it's called www, this is how you can contact her, www.theloveboatlady.com. That's www.theloveboatlady.com. Let's go back to hypoglycemia. So you, at age 89, are modeling, are working, are active. And would you say that not eating processed sugar is the one thing, that you think is you want to tell people?
I feel I don't have any rheumatism or arthritis, and I swim every night, and I dance, and I do gardening, and plus I do a lot of professional work. And so even all the years that I worked on the ship as a cruise director, I never had one grain of sugar go by my lips. Because I had to work so many hours a day, and I had to keep my figure. So I think that's why I feel so well, and I am well, is because I don't eat sugar.
And that consciousness, it's consciousness of not eating processed sugar. When did you realize that?
When I had hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, and couldn't find anyone to help me, and my daughter had it also, and finally I realized. I went to the library and found a book called Body, Mind, and Sugar. And
my goodness. Was that John Yudkin's book?
Oh,
he was Sweet and Dangerous.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yes. Pizet.
Okay.
And Gloria
Swanson?
Swanson's book.
Oh, yes.
I forget what it was called. It was great.
With Bill Duffy, Sugar Blues.
Yes, I used to go in bookstores and I'd take that and put it up. I range so that people would buy it. But I educated myself, and I realized that I'd have to stay away from sugar and refine carbohydrates, just carbohydrates that are natural. And so I've been healthy ever since, thank goodness. And it keeps, when your blood sugar goes down low, it makes you depressed also. So this way I keep happy all the time.
Right. No, it certainly could. So you would say that really it was the Gloria Swanson, Bill Duffy book that was one of the real influential books for you in the mid-'60s?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And it just made sense. Was that it? Not eating sugar?
I thought I'd try it. I had stomach ulcers, and I thought, well, I'm going to try it. So I just stayed off sugar for a week and felt fine.
Right. Yeah, some people just get it. That's been my observation. Some people just get it. And some people are like a great musician. They have perfect pitch. They can hear one song and play it back. But they don't know how to take care of themselves. I'm speaking broadly. But some people just get the whole wellness thing. It always made sense to me right away. Sugar, as soon as I found out it was bad for you, I never ate it again. I thought, no, it's a bad idea.
And you can only accomplish as much as you have the energy for.
Right.
And Sheila and I, with this biography that she wrote about me called The Love Boat Lady, if we didn't have the energy, most people our age are on the rocking chairs.
Oh, that's right.
We have energy, so
that's right.
we got that book
Oh,
out.
that's right. Oh, yes. And Philip Johnson, the architect, international architect, I mean, he was 94. He was building buildings.
94?
94. As long as your health is good, people take you seriously. They work with you. It's really when your health deteriorates, and this is not a gender issue. It's not a male. It's just like, no, your health is deteriorating. You can't work anymore, and people can't maybe forget about you. It's unfortunate. I don't want to sound unkind, but no, as long as your health is good, man, they take you seriously. Mm-hmm. I once had the pleasure of hearing Scott Nearing lecture. He was the author of the Maple Sugar book. And he was a back-to-the-lander. He was author of wellness books. And I heard him lecture. It was in Boston. It was in the 70s. I was working for Ann Wigmore. And he was about 94. And he lectured to 500 people in Ford Hall. Didn't use a microphone. For an hour and a half, he was dynamite. Dynamite. He was just dynamite. And he was very, very impressive, really. And so I've luckily always seen work with people as a much younger man who were much older, and their health was great because they took care of themselves. Mm-hmm. It was very simple. No processed sugar, fresh foods. It was actually surprisingly simple. And they were just strong, healthy, and active into a very advanced age. Now, of course, people are living longer. People are living a lot longer, and people will continue to live a lot longer. But in the 60s and 70s, if you made it to 80, people thought, oh, my God, you're 80. It's like, and now it's like 80 is like, it's not a big deal. It's like, it's like 80 is fine. You're still playing doubles tennis, and you're still traveling and enjoying yourself. So, But you were really one of the pioneers.
Yes, I think I read my book, of course. I thought when I wrote the first one called Hypoglycemia, the Disease Your Doctor Won't Treat, I thought probably, I mentioned trade names in there, like you shouldn't give children Ritalin. You have to just give them good food and keep them away from the sugar. And I thought surely that those drug companies were going to shoot me. But I had a chapter in there called The Magnificent Minority, and that was the few doctors who have studied nutrition after they've gotten out of medical school. Right. And that is a magnificent minority. So the doctors gave that book to their patients because they were one of the magnificent minority.
Well, that was very progressive. And it's nice to have influence. Did people used to write to you about the book?
Yes. They carried it in the Times and had people all over the world writing to me. One lady used to write me from Holland. She said she was in the airport and she picked up my book and she was going to turn herself into the mental hospital when she got back home to Holland. But she read the book on the plane, and when she went home, she just changed her diet, and she wrote me every day telling me how good she felt.
That's very nice. It's nice to have influence on people's lives. It's really very nice.
Especially for children. If you don't give them sugar, they don't crave it as much if you don't give it to them.
Right. That's been my observation. So, for example, you try to eat protein 3 or 4 meals a day. Is that one of the focus things you do?
I try to make if you have a fistful of protein, then you have 2 fistfuls of complex carbohydrates, and then make sure that you get your fats and oils too. So you have that combination. And the perfect combination is in macadamia nuts. If in between meals, you can nibble on those.
Yeah, those are great snacks.
They're easy to carry with you when you're.
They certainly are. You eat one of them, you're kind of full, right? One macadamia nut. Is that what you advocate? One macadamia nut?
No, I eat the whole can.
Oh, really? Well, it doesn't show. It certainly doesn't show. And so you stabilize blood sugar. May I ask, are there any supplements that you happen to be happy with? You want to mention that you use?
I eat so many fresh fruits and vegetables that I really don't have to supplement. And I always get the organic.
All right. So you are 89 and very vital and continue to work, and you are just a careful eater.
I don't take any medicine at all.
Good for you.
I don't take any pills.
Right. A lot of people who might be your age listening to you, they would say, oh, that's not true. She must be taking something. Because everyone is taking 4 or 5 meds, right? They're taking blood pressure medication. So you take 0 meds.
Right.
0. And may I ask, how long has it been since you've taken 0 meds? You've taken 0 meds forever?
I never have taken any.
Uh-huh. And I know in your book you mentioned that your brothers and sisters, they've all actually passed away a long time ago, right?
Yes, they used to laugh at me. They would laugh at me. They thought I was a health nut, and of course they all passed away early. They were all younger than I were, and they all passed away.
And because, unfortunately, in retrospect, they were just conventional thinkers about food. They just ate what everyone else ate. And you thought this was just a bad idea.
Well, in fact, they used to make fun of me. One day they were saying, we're all together and my mother's bird wasn't singing. And they said, "Oh, maybe it has hypoglycemia," and they all laughed.
Yeah, taking abuse for your ideas. Oh well. Were you a good sport about that?
Yeah, I
to be,
was
yeah.
used to it. Yeah,
Yeah, right. Used to it.
being
Yeah.
fun.
Oh well. And on the Love Boat, I noticed you mentioned. Now there are a lot of stars that I guess young people will hear and they think, well, who's that? Now you mentioned Sharo was the most. She was on the most. Is that it?
She was on more Love Boat episodes than any other star.
And roughly how many times was that, by the way?
I don't know, but she's adorable, and you should see her now. She looks just like she did years ago. She plays the guitar beautifully.
You said she's a good musician.
She's a classical guitarist, and she's so adorable. And what a personality! So,
And who was her husband? Xavier Cugat?
yes, he passed away, but now she has a very sweet husband too.
Of course, Xavier Cugat was much older than she.
Yes,
She was a girl in her 20s. He was a man in his 50s. Was that not
Yes,
so?
but they were happily married.
And she was the front man. She was the singer.
Yes,
Great singer, yes.
coochie coochie.
Yeah, and she was big for a very long time, right? People, I do remember as a young man watching her on TV, and the comedians liked to go after Sharo for some reason. She seemed to be a good-natured sport of a target, and she was always seen as being a no talent. Is that the way that comedians? Wouldn't they make fun of her for being a no talent?
Well, she had difficulty with the language, and so,
But that was part of the stage act, wasn't it?
yeah. She said,
Yeah.
I speak 8 languages, and my mother can't understand me in any of them.
Oh, I see. Did she actually speak 8 languages?
That's what she says. Yeah, she
I
travels
believe
so
it, yeah.
much. She does shows practically every night all over the world. She's busy, busy, busy.
So on TV in the United States, then when I used to watch her, it was an act that she was a dummy. It was part of the act.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's what I thought. Really, that's interesting. So really, did you have influence with these people as far as wellness and astrology? I mean, some people really don't like it to put astrology, which is progressive in my opinion, as a philosophy, and wellness together. Did you have influence with any stars? You don't have to necessarily mention their name, but did people listen to you?
Well, most stars are looking for ways to improve themselves and keep healthy, and they're more open-minded to accept vitamins and things, and also different ways of thinking about the universe. But they also don't mind accepting astrology. Most of them, if they've looked into it, and most of them follow it.
And again, so I mean, as of today, your Sidney Omar column for astrology is worldwide.
Yes, it's worldwide.
And how long has Sidney Omar's columns been in the papers?
Oh,
Is it 25, 30 years?
oh no,
Longer?
it's more like 70.
70 years. Oh, excuse me. Oh, my goodness.
And they don't dare let it out because the switchboard just lights up and where's the astrology column?
And you have other editors working with you on that one. You have editors.
I do it myself.
Oh, you still do?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Oh,
Just have to look at your ephemeris and find out you see, to do a real horoscope, you have to have the month, day, hour, year, and place. But this is just like taking an aspirin. It isn't like going to a doctor and getting diagnosed. The only information I have is what zodiacal sign they are.
Oh.
So I see where the moon is that day and where the other planets are, and I see what the effects are, and it's a quick little reading. It isn't like getting
Gotcha.
your whole horoscope done.
Wow. Oh, I'm sorry. I did not realize you were actively involved with that. Oh, good for you.
Yes.
Oh, good for you. So for your 100th birthday, you have a big party. Is that it? You have a big party?
I danced all night.
That's real good. We are talking to Geraldine Saunders. This book is written by Sheila Murray, her friend. It's called The Love Boat Lady. It's about her life story, which is actually very interesting and a fun read. And where can we get this book? Is it Amazon.com the best spot? Or?
Yes.
Who else carries it? All the bookstores carry. All the big bookstores they carry it.
In Pasadena, they have it at Romans.
Okay.
And
Where else? Can you remember? No answer.
I'm not sure.
Which bookstore? Which one?
Flint Ridge Bookstore.
Flint Ridge.
Flint Ridge Books. Okay, that's a local one. That's very good. And tell you the truth, I read the book, and it's nice to get a sense of what people have accomplished. And there are a lot of people around who have great accomplishment, and you don't necessarily know their name. And you've had great accomplishment. It's very nice, actually. I'm very pleased you could come to my show. I really am.
Done
thankful.
a lot of studying.
Yeah. Well, studying seems like a good idea, doesn't it?
It's my hobby.
Yeah, it seems like a very good idea. Those of you just tuning in, my guest today has been Geraldine Saunders, who wrote a book called The Love Boats, which gave rise to the TV series The Love Boats. And Geraldine is a fashion model and an astrologer who actually writes the Sydney Omar column, which is everywhere. And it's been a great pleasure having you on my show. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a very short break, and we'll be right back after these important messages.
Bottled at the source since 1871, Mountain Valley Water is the deepest operating spring in America. This naturally alkaline water, with a perfect blend of minerals, has a crisp, clean taste that's twice been named best tasting water in the world. Mountain Valley Water has been served in the White House for 13 presidents, but it's also served kings, including Elvis Presley, whose only requirement on tour was 2 6-packs of Mountain Valley Water. Delivered to your home or office in glass bottles, Mountain Valley Water will give new customers in Southern California their first 2 5-gallon bottles free. For more information, call 1-800-499-9982 or visit us online at www.mountainvalleywaterla.com. Mountain Valley Water is the official sponsor of Here's to Your Health with Josh Lane on LA Talk Live.
Now you can get new music from GospelRhythms.com site host John McClure Jr., a.k.a. Simply John. His new single, We Acknowledge You, has been released from his highly anticipated recording, Simply John, Born to Worship. A personal favorite of B.B. Winans and a Sunday Best finalist, John's music and message is sure to inspire you. We Acknowledge You by John McClure Jr., available now on iTunes, Amazon.com, and CD Baby.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute, Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
We're back. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health. I'm your host, Joshua Lane, and you're listening to us today on the LA Talk Live radio network. And calling in from Malibu, California, is Sherry Gaba, who is a therapist, who was, you may have seen her on VH1 Celebrity Rehab. Sherry, are you on the line?
I am. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for being a guest today on Here's to Your Health. Now, you work with people who are well-known and people who are not well-known, and you offer them guidance. And do many of the people you work with, is your guidance, it's educational guidance and also physical guidance? Is that how you combine things for patients?
Well, being a psychotherapist, I specialize mostly in addictions. I don't really help them physically. I help them emotionally and spiritually and mentally, helping them understand the underlying issues, behind the addiction, helping them figure out, what's the spiritual piece that's missing in their life, and, trying to help them move forward in their life. That's the recovery coaching piece. I do a little bit of therapy and a little bit of coaching.
And so when you work with people who have a problem with, say, alcoholism, do you work with any kind of physical component in that? Problems with hyperglycemia, problems with diabetes?
No, that would not be my, scope of practice. That's more of a medical. I'm a psychotherapist. So I'm about I'm the talking head. I'm not the person that does all the medical piece. Mm-mm.
And may I ask, what kind of, are there any broad guidelines you can mention to our viewers that you find very helpful?
Depends on if you're asking if somebody's wondering if they're an addict or an alcoholic. Are you asking?
Yes.
I mean, what exactly do you mean by broad guidelines?
Well, let's say someone listening to our broadcast, they have a family member who has a problem with substance abuse. What can they do to help that person?
Well, the first thing you want to do is get them help, and you want to either call a 12-step. Well, you can take them to a 12-step program like an AA meeting or an NA meeting, depending on what the issue is. You can call a psychotherapist or a life coach. I would say a psychotherapist to start. You can even call an Alcoholics Anonymous hotline number. You can take them to a local hospital if they're really in trouble and that you think that they need a detox. You want to find out, obviously if they're suicidal. Sometimes, unfortunately, the end of an alcoholic career can end up in suicidal thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's the case, you want to make sure that you get them to a hospital immediately. The question is, what are the signs to look for? Is the person missing work? Is the person isolating? Is the person not showing up? Are they gone for days on end? Are they depressed? Are they starting to get legal problems? They lost their job? Have they lost their children? What are the ramifications? What are the dark consequences that are occurring? Then we know, there's a problem.
Yes. And so you meet with clients one-on-one. Can you give me an idea of what is it that you do? I know it's a very broad question, but let's say you're working with a particular client. I mean, what do you try to focus on? Their childhood? Is their childhood terribly important?
A lot of times with people that are struggling with addictions, there's a history of trauma, some sort of, there can be some possible neglect or some abandonment. They might have had parents themselves that were addicts or alcoholics. And remember, I don't just work with alcoholics and addicts. I work with people that have other addictions. And really, all addictions sort of come from the same place. There's this underlying need to numb out. There's this underlying need to self-medicate, whether it's shopping, gambling, sex, love, drugs, alcohol, food, whatever that nature is. Often it does come from some sort of lack of, some sort of feeling of emptiness, some sort of feeling of not being enough. And this might have started a long time ago in their childhood. So, yeah, you want to get an assessment of what their childhood was like. Then you want to get a history of, when they started using, how much they're using, have they ever had any sobriety, what kind of program have they had in the past, what failed, what worked. These are the kind of questions. And then, if somebody has some sobriety in maybe a couple of years or maybe a year or even maybe a few months, what I like to do is find out what their purpose is. Let's move away, a little bit from sobriety and let's talk about, what makes you light up, what is it that you desire in life, what makes you happy, and then we kind of get into the coaching and helping them find purpose and passion in their life.
Well, okay, those broad ideas sound very good, and if you don't mind, if I can focus on the alcohol question, when you refer people out to say AA or I guess NA for narcotics users, those organizations, you're happy with those organizations?
Well, sure. I think that the 12-step program is wonderful. I wrote a book called The Law of Sobriety, Attracting Positive Energy for a Powerful Recovery, because some people are not going to right off the bat be open to meetings. And, the whole thing about working with an addict or alcoholic or anyone struggling with any sort of addiction is you want to meet them where they're at. So I wrote this book to help them find another source of support, metaphysical solutions, using the universe. Sometimes people object to 12-step meetings because they don't believe in God. So the whole idea of the law of sobriety is let's look at, how your recovery, what you put into the universe, the energy that you put out there is what you're going to get back in your recovery program.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people find that more palatable. They don't want to go to a 12-step program. Although I am a big believer in 12 steps, I also think there are other options out there.
Yes. And so the 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, the belief in God, you mean many clients will just simply will not go because of that?
Yeah, they find it to be too spiritual, too religious, although it really isn't a religious program, it's a spiritual program. But they do talk a lot about God, and there's just a lot of people that do not want to, talk about God. Although in the 12 steps, the God is basically a higher power of one's understanding, so it doesn't have to be the God, the man with the beard. It can be, it can be the room of Alcoholics Anonymous. But again, when people hear the word God, and they do use the word God in the 12-step program, sometimes people get turned off. And, that's okay. It may take them a while to warm up to the idea of going to a meeting. I think that the most important thing, whether they go to meetings or not, is to have a fellowship of friends that are also sober, so that they have people they can relate to. Otherwise, they start isolating. They start thinking that they can drink like, quote, normal people. And an alcoholic or addict, their brain is much different than our brains. It lights up differently. They need to be reminded of their disease. And by going to meetings or finding other sober friends, that will help in their recovery process.
I see. And so really when people have a problem with alcohol and you are working as a counselor with them, they really have to refrain from alcohol 100%.
Yes. Anybody that's, quote, an alcoholic who has the disease of alcoholism, possibly the genetic predisposition, whatever it is, they suddenly now had grave, grave consequences. They need to keep alcohol out of their life. Now, there is something called substance abuse. Substance abuse is where somebody might have abused alcohol in their life, but they're not necessarily an alcoholic. They haven't become dependent. They don't need it 24/7. They went through a hard time in their life and they might have abused. There are different rules of thought on that. My feeling is that if someone is not a, quote, alcoholic, and they just abused at different times in their life, they may be able to go out there and drink again. It'll be up to them to determine if they've abused it or they're an alcoholic. That's not for me to decide.
And I do have a question. I know there's been many articles and news, TV shows about the binge drinking that occurs on many college campuses in the United States. Is binge drinking how do you work with binge drinking for a young person?
Well, there's periodic, which are real, there are some people that you could call periodic or binge drinkers that are real alcoholics that disappear for 4 or 5 days and they're just out of control. As far as the college campuses, there may be a lot of experimentation. People are just, wanting to, they're nervous. They don't feel like they fit in. They're off to college. They're away from home. There's a lot of anxiety. So they binge drink. Are they an alcoholic? Only time will tell, but the bottom line is when you binge drink, you are getting into a danger zone because you can die of alcoholism.
Yes.
I mean, you're really, if you're taking, 19 shots because it's your 19th birthday, you're in big trouble. So my feeling is that when you're in college, there has to be this, mindful, safe drinking that needs to occur where, you look at it from a different point of view and you know that binge drinking can cause a lot of problems. Now, if somebody really cannot stop, if a person cannot stop drinking and they have no control over their drinking, we're most likely talking about alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
The average, someone who just has, once they sort of don't have a turn on and off button. So it's hard for me to say all binge drinkers are alcoholics, but I'll say this, if somebody is binging and they just can't stop, there's a really good chance they're a real alcoholic, and they will not be able to drink like a normal person. Someone who's binging and abusing, that was my story. I abused alcohol in college. I drank, like a fish. I abused it. Later on, I discovered that I wasn't an alcoholic. I had just abused it at a time in my life. But I would never, anybody that's binging, there's obviously something going on underneath. They're having anxiety. They're depressed, low self-esteem. They don't feel like they fit in. And so it would be really important to address what's really going on so that they don't have to binge, so that they can feel comfortable in their own skin.
All right.
It's a very tough question.
No, thank you. It was a good answer. It was a broad question. So let me ask you now: is there a difference between the generations? So I'm a man in my 60s, and so do the young ones now in their 20s? Do they work with alcohol and see alcohol differently than the baby boom generation? Is there a different perspective?
Well, I think what's happening is the biggest problem right now isn't even just alcohol. I work at several rehabs in Malibu, and what we're seeing, unfortunately, is a huge number of heroin addicts and opiate addicts, people that have gotten on Vicodin or Oxycontin, and then they can't afford that anymore, and then they turn to shooting up heroin. So, it's all not good. It's all an issue. But what I'm seeing mostly in the younger population today is a lot of the opiate addictions, to be perfectly honest.
And again, your perspective on that is because they get hooked on expensive prescription drugs, cannot afford them, and they turn to Mexican tar heroin.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened.
Well, that doesn't sound very good. Has this been going on for the past, 5 or 10 years?
Oh, it's been going on for a while. I mean, I worked in hospice maybe 7 years ago, and the only time you heard of Oxycontin or Vicodin was when you were dealing with a dying cancer patient, and now suddenly you hear about it all the time. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, I would say in the last 5-7 years, yes, it's just growing like crazy. And I would say most of the young people I'm working with in rehab in Malibu and all over, it's not just Malibu, of course, it's anywhere, is this heroin epidemic.
And, okay, let me ask a possibly unpopular question. Is there a class issue with the people using heroin? In other words, are the educated, affluent elite using heroin, or is every young person who has trouble substance abuse using heroin?
Yeah, basically the way I'm going to answer that is any sort of addiction, alcoholism, pain meds, opiates, meth, crystal meth, all of those are basically, there are no socioeconomic, they cross all lines.
Okay.
They're not rich, they're not poor, they're not black, they're not white, they're not gay, they're not straight. I mean, it just pretty much covers the gamut. You can't really pinpoint any sort of socioeconomic group that is becoming, heroin addicts or opiate addicts. It's just not that. It's just not. It crosses all lines.
Is that a new phenomena, or has it always been that way?
I think there might have been a time when you see the harder drugs maybe in the lower socioeconomic communities, but it's been a long time since that's been the case. It really has. I mean, I haven't seen that in a long time.
Yes.
I mean, we have housewives at home that are addicted to pain meds. They have a back surgery, and then what happens is the doctor gives them pain meds. Let's say they had a history of alcoholism. Suddenly, they're given pain meds, and now they've opened up Pandora's box, and they've become a drug addict. So they're an alcoholic and a drug addict.
Yes, I understand that.
Now, of course, alcohol is a liquid drug, so they were always a drug addict, but people don't see themselves as drug addicts when they're alcoholics, but they really, pretty much are. But what I'm saying is if they get on pain meds and they have a history of alcohol addiction or alcoholism, they better tell that doctor, because they are opening up Pandora's box. I see that all the time.
Yes. Sherry, do me a favor. Sherry,
I saw that in my own family, which was very painful. Yes.
Excuse me, Sherry, please hold that thought. We are speaking with Sherry Gaba, a therapist. You may have seen her on VH1 Celebrity Rehab. Sherry is calling in from her clinic in Malibu, California. We'll be right back with Sherry Gaba after these important messages.
Hey everybody, it's Miss R&B, and I'm inviting you to come and hang with me every Thursday night at 9 p.m. PST for Perspectives Corner with Rona Rowe Bennett on America Talk Live. Hear and see interviews and live performances from some of our favorite celebrities and personalities in entertainment, sports, business, and the wellness industries. We're getting lifted and we're going deep, talking about life and empowering the champion in us all. See you there.
Brooksy, maker of fine laptop apparel, laptop covers and sleeves, iPhone covers, and unique home decor. Brooksy laptop sleeves are made to order and can be custom made to fit your computer. Just send a message with your order telling us the model and the dimensions of your laptop, and we'll make you your very own sleeve in whichever design you choose. Any of the pillow designs can be turned into laptop sleeves too. Remember, Brooksy for all your computer embellishment needs. You can find Brooksy at www.brooksy.com. That's BROKESY.com. And remember to tell them that you heard it here on LA Talk Live. We are more than just talk.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute, Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
We're back. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health. I'm your host, Joshua Lane, and you're listening to us today on the LA Talk Live radio network. Our guest is Sherry Gaba, who is a therapist. You may have seen her on VH1's Celebrity Rehab, And Sherry also is a journalist and writes regularly for the Huffington Post. And Sherry is calling in today, I guess, from one of her clinics in Malibu, California. Sherry, are you on the line?
I am, Josh. And I wanted to make sure that everybody knew to go to my website. There's some free ebooks for them.
Certainly.
That doesn't cost them anything. It's Sherry Gaba, SherryGaba.com. That's SherryGaba.com. And I have all kinds of free bonus gifts. I also have a love addiction test that they can take if somebody thinks that they might be a love addict. It's free, and they'll get a free ebook on how to eliminate love addiction.
Sherry, what is love addiction?
Love addiction is very similar to, having any other kind of addiction. There's this chronic empty hole in oneself, and they feel that a relationship or a partner or somebody else will fix that hole inside of them. They have usually very low self-esteem. They don't know how to be alone, and they sometimes, run the risk of being with abusive people that don't treat them well, people that are emotionally unavailable. They'll do anything to be with anybody because they cannot stand being by themselves. And they believe that being in love, they're sort of in love with love, and they feel that love and which really isn't love, because love is an act. Love is not just a feeling. They think that will be the answer to all their issues and problems.
Is that very common?
Very common. Very, very common. We see people that have multiple. I'm definitely a love addict, and the love addiction piece in my life was what fueled the alcohol abuse. It was a feeling that I needed to be with somebody, a feeling that I couldn't, and want to be alone. I had a history of trauma, and that affected my decision making, and I picked a lot of really bad relationships in order to feel that I could, that person could fulfill me and make me feel whole. And what I learned is that no one else can fill that empty hole. No one else can make me feel whole. The only person that can do that is me and my, whatever recovery program I have in my life, any sort of spiritual program that I have in my life.
So you are a successful therapist now, and when you were a college student, was your undergraduate psychology? In other words, you always, even as a very young woman, had this was a very interesting subject to you, or you just kind of your life just took you in this direction?
Oh, that's a long story, Josh. We would need 2 hours, but I was actually a journalist. I was going to be a journalism major, and I was going to be the next Barbara Walters. That was when I was a young woman, and then I became pregnant, became a single mother, just making really bad choices in my life, and through that process, eventually, later on in life, decided to become a therapist. I wanted to give back to other single mothers what had been so freely given to me, and I wanted to help people with addictions, and I wanted to work with women that, were doing a lot of the things that were keeping them from living a fulfilling life, making choices, having consequences to their choices that were hindering them from so basically, I'm one of those people that kind of had a calling later in life and became a therapist, and then later started to do a radio show with Dr. Drew, and then eventually invited to do his show, Celebrity Rehab. And so right now I have the best of everything. I'm a therapist, I'm a blogger, I'm a media expert, and I love life, and I have a lot of purpose in my life.
And you have found that you just have, let me use the word gift, you just find that you can just, based on life experience and also training, that you can help people. You offer them insight they just don't have, and they respond. Is that it?
Absolutely, and I think some of us that have life experience even have more offer. I think that's one of the gifts of being a therapist a little bit later in life, although I'm not that old. But I've been a single mother, I've struggled with different abuse, I've been a love addict, I've abused alcohol. Sometimes when you've had issues and you have the professional experience, the two together are quite. You're just more in tune to your clients. You just have more of a sense of where they're coming from. And they trust you more because they know that you know where they're at. That's not to say that a therapist can't be an excellent therapist that hasn't had experience, but I find with my clients the connection to me is incredible because they know that I've been there.
Well, that makes perfect sense to me. You understand these problems because you've experienced them, the way you experience them, and then so you can guide patients. And sometimes when you simply talk to patients, you offer them insight that they don't have, and sometimes they have a little aha moment. Is that it? Do people have aha moments?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Josh. Aha moments are exactly what happens sometimes. You know, it could take years for that light bulb to go off. I mean, you could even be a therapist and be, you know, someone that is in denial of your own disease, or, you know, it's basically it's a process. You know, it's a process, and so it doesn't happen overnight. It takes some work. But if you have somebody that's insightful and you're ready to do the work, you know, in a matter of time, you know, you get it, and you get what's underneath, why you're drinking, why are you using, why are you going from relationship to relationship, what's going on underneath. You know, let's unearth all of that stuff underneath and move forward. I'm about helping people move forward. I'm not about sitting and working with people for years and years and years and years, you know, going over the same old stories. I want people to have great, purposeful lives.
And and do you find that you have helped a large number of people who once had these issues, and now their lives are just better because they have, I use the word training that you've offered them, they now can cope more successfully?
Absolutely, especially the trauma clients who have a history of trauma. I have some excellent methods to helping people with trauma. I have a few methods that have really, you know, kind of unearthed that trauma that lives in their bodies. And, you know, you can talk all day long, but sometimes you have to do other things other than just talk therapy. You have to do therapy where they get in touch with what's feeling in their bodies. You know, what is going on in their bodies that's been stored. It's a long conversation, but it's all about toxic energy that's been held in their bodies.
And and so could you define that term? What do you mean trauma? You mean like a physical trauma, like their mom or dad beat them? What are we chatting about?
That's one trauma. I mean, trauma can be anything. It could be divorce, death, could be neglect, abandonment, you know, parents that have addicts, parents that were emotionally unavailable, parents that were physically unavailable, not getting the proper nurturing, not getting the proper bonding. It could be a tsunami. It could be earthquake, fire, car accident, airplane crash. I mean, it could, you know, it's not just a war veteran. It's anything that causes, you know, post-traumatic stress, where their body has been, you know, has shut down and disassociated, has numbed out because the trauma was so great.
Yes.
It could be molestation. It's quite, you know, everyone thinks that, I haven't had trauma. I had a great childhood. Well, there can be, you know, what if they were bullied? Bullying can be trauma.
Yes.
You know, it's just endless, you know, and people really underestimate what trauma does. A lot of people come to me and say, I can't move forward in my lives. I want to go to college, but I just can't get myself to sign up. It's because they're stuck, and they're stuck because trauma lies in their bodies, and they need to get it out.
I see. Sherry, once again, please give us your contact information.
Oh, thank you, Josh. It's SherryGaba.com, SherryGaba.com, SherryGaba.com. There's some wonderful free bonus gifts, and there's a free Love Addict questionnaire that if you take that, you get a free ebook on how to eliminate the love addictions in your life.
Sherry Gaba, thank you very much for calling in, and thank you for being a guest. The information was very insightful, and hopefully we'll have you again on our show.
My pleasure, Josh.
Thank you, Sherry. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been listening to Sherry Gaba, who was a therapist on Celebrity Rehab on VH1. You're listening to us today on the LA Talk Live radio network. I'm your host, Joshua Lane, and we'll be right back with Philip Goldberg after these important messages.
Hey everybody, this is Richard Carr inviting you to join me in the radio boardroom for the new Entrepreneurs Weekly Summit in my all-new day and time. That's right, the new Entrepreneurs Weekly Summit is moving to Mondays at 5 p.m. Pacific. So don't forget, the new Entrepreneurs Weekly Summit, now Mondays at 5 p.m. Pacific, exclusively here on LA Talk Live, where it's more than just talk. We'll see you there.
Hey, what's up? It's your girls, Forbidden Gems, inviting you to join us every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. sharp for the hottest, livest talk show, Forbidden Tuesdays.
Join us as we expose the new generation of love and dating and help y'all run the game right.
Ladies beware, fellas bring out your notepads. So don't forget to tune in to Forbidden Tuesdays
exclusively on LATalkLive.com. You can also catch us on iTunes Radio R&B or watch us on Ustream TV. This is
LA Talk Live,
and we are more than just talk.
You ready?
Hi, this is Dr. Levi, your fitness doctor, making a personal house call, inviting you to join me Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific for my all-new show, The Dr. Levi Show. Join us as we discuss fitness, health, and well-being, including emotional and spiritual health. So don't forget to tune in to The Dr. Levi Show every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, exclusively on LATalkLive.com and the Talk Live Broadcast Network. You can also catch us on iTunes, Radio R&B, or watch us on Ustream.tv, or catch us on the Live 365 network, and now on Radio Flag and Stitcher Radio. Reality radio handcrafted for your listening pleasure. This is LA Talk Live, and we are more than just talk.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute, Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
Hello, thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health. I'm your host, Josh Lane. You're listening to us today on the LA Talk Live radio network. And in studio, we have Philip Goldberg, the author of American Veda, a very nicely done book that talks about how Eastern, I'll use that word, broad term, religious thought has influenced American society. He starts very conveniently with the Beatles when they met with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and I guess in 68. Philip Goldberg, thank you for being a guest on Here's to Your Health.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. I think it's we have a little choir in the back. You don't see them. They're very small, but they do clap when it's appropriate.
Hi, this is...
Hi, who is this? Dave Stringer calling in? No, Dave hung up, so just having a little technical thing. He'll possibly call back. So, Philip, what prompted you to write this book?
I've been involved with yoga and Indian spiritual teaching since the 60s, and it transformed my life and the lives of millions of other people like me. And then over time, I saw the influence of the teaching sort of spread into other areas of the culture, like psychology and medicine and mainstream religion. And I thought, there's a book in this, so I did it.
Would you like to, where's a convenient place to start? What would you like to start with that you felt was just really influential? You want to start with the Beatles, visiting
Everything seems to start with the Beatles.
Might as well, everyone knows the Beatles.
My presentation at Bhakti Fest this week, since we're here to talk about that, is about the Beatles and their spiritual journey and how it influenced their music and how they in turn influenced the rest of us. When they went to India, it was a kind of watershed moment.
And this was 68.
Early 68. They had learned transcendental meditation a few months earlier. That was a big moment. So it was sort of overnight that the world understood that there was something called meditation. There were sounds called mantras. There was people called gurus. There was places called ashrams. And it just shoved everything into the mainstream. And the result of all that was serious people taking Indian spiritual traditions seriously and doing research on it. That's when it started to enter the medical community and changing the way psychologists look at things. But the story really goes back, more than 100 years prior to that. The sort of thing set the stage for the Beatles. But it was a huge moment.
Actually, in retrospect, it really was a huge moment because the Beatles had such international clout that I guess, as a young man, when I remember them going to India, I just thought, oh, Beatles in India, and I thought it was actually very interesting. And I wasn't antagonistic. I just thought the Beatles in India, it didn't seem like it was a big deal. But now in retrospect, I realize no, it was a big deal. And I guess many of our parents' generation who were Christian or Jewish thought, oh my Lord, what are these children doing with this devil worship? I mean, there was a lot of antagonism.
That's exactly right. But if you look at the media coverage, which was constant and daily at that time, you see a lot of the opposite. You see people who wished their kids would go to church or whatever, but they were really grateful that they were meditating instead of getting stoned and getting busted.
Yes.
And they were cleaning up their acts and, going back to school or whatever. Because parents at the time were terrified of the tune-in, drop-out kind of culture. And so there was a lot of positive coverage, much more than you would think if you were looking back on it.
And you've investigated this, so as a journalist, as a researcher, as a historian, in general, in your opinion, it was overwhelmingly positive.
The impact has been most overwhelmingly positive. Or do you mean the media coverage?
Well, the impact for sure, but the media coverage was very positive.
It was much more positive than I anticipated, because I thought it would be, in retrospect, when I looked at it, the coverage of that was much more positive. I expected much more cynicism and much more sort of attack. Mm-hmm. But there was less of that than I thought. It was, what is this? Does India have something to offer us? What is this all about? Oh, it's not just dropouts and cults. It's something serious, and science is now investigating it, and that's what really made it go mainstream.
And may I ask you a personal question?
Yes.
Was there a particular teacher that influenced you in the 1960s?
Many of them did, but I followed the Beatles' lead and learned TM and became a teacher of that practice back
I see.
then. Yeah. But I've of course studied all the others.
I remember a funny moment in college. I was in a bar hanging around. I don't drink, but my friends were drinking, and someone got very drunk and they said, I'm going to tell you my mantra. And I remember thinking that it was very funny. And then this fellow told us the mantra, and everyone said, we have the same mantra.
There was a lot of there was a lot
funny
of that.
Story, really.
There aren't an infinite number of mantras that people use to meditate, and so there was some confusion around.
And so that was the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
Yeah.
And so you studied transcendental meditation.
Yeah, and I spent time with him,
and you felt that was valuable to you. It helped you.
Extremely valuable, and it continues to be for millions of people, as do all the other yogic practices, including now the popularity of kirtan, the traditional chanting form that will be featured at Bhakti Fest this week.
And by the way, tell us, where exactly is Bhakti Fest this weekend?
Joshua Tree, out in the high desert above Palm Springs.
And you're appearing live on stage.
I will be there
you can do a seminar?
making my Bhakti Fest debut on Thursday, and it'll be centered on the Beatles' spiritual journey and with some of their music. And a performer named Jim Beckwith will do some live music of Beatles tunes.
And so you are a professional journalist?
Yeah.
And so you probably covered many topics. So on the yoga, in the 1920s, when Paramahansa Yogananda showed up, was that really the big moment for the East and West?
That was the second big moment in the pre-Beatles era. The first being when Swami Vivekananda came in 1893, and then
for a World's Fair.
In Chicago, and set up the Vedanta Society, which then was pretty much the only game in town for decades. And then Yogananda came and was the first of the gurus to make the U.S. his home, and settled here in L.A. and spent the next 32 years here, and was the L.A. Times called him the first superstar guru of the 20th century, and he was.
Which actually is fair. Yes, it's very fair.
Absolutely.
Paramahansa Yogananda today still exerts influence, does he not?
Huge, largely because of the organizations that were set up to propagate his teachings, but mainly because of the Autobiography of a Yogi, which is
very important.
Still selling thousands of copies a month all these years later. It's nearly 60 years later.
It's impressive.
More than 60 years later.
Yes, we have a caller. Dave, is that you calling in?
I'm here.
Dave, hi.
Hey,
Are you calling in from LAX? Where are you calling in from, Dave?
No, I'm calling in from northern Michigan.
Oh, I see. Okay. Not quite as glamorous, but still northern Michigan. And you are a singer, performer of curtain music. Is that correct?
That's me.
And you're on your way to Europe. You'll be performing where? In Netherlands?
Yeah, I'm actually just finishing a vacation in northern Michigan with my family. I'm going back to play boxing, heading to Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, and France.
We're catching a certain amount of reverb on your phone call. Is this part of your new musical experience?
Why don't I try and call you from a landline?
That'd be a much better idea, yes. Yeah, this is internet radio, and the landline works way better. We mentioned we have Philip Goldberg in studio, author of American Veda, a very nicely done book on spiritual experiences in the United States and worldwide. And Philip will be speaking at Bhakti Fest 2012, September 6th to the 9th, out in Joshua Tree, California. You can buy tickets. Should be really much of a fun and very nice weekend, 3-day weekend. There's also been Bhakti Fest, because we had Shri on the show. Bhakti Fest also in the Midwest and Madison, Wisconsin, a very lovely and progressive city in Wisconsin. So while we're waiting for Dave to get back on the line, will Dave be performing or Dave will just be chatting?
I'm sure he is.
Going to chat with us, perform?
Very good. I'm sure he's one of the main performers at Bhakti Fest.
And can I, without getting too personal, are there any other spiritual teachers that have had a big influence on you?
I love them all. I've learned from every one of them, especially since I started researching American Veda. But even prior to that, I mean, I had my personal involvement with Maharishi and the TM world, but I had read Autobiography of a Yogi. Even prior to that, it was a big influence on me. All the publications of the Vedanta societies back in the 60s, and all the Westerners who were propagators of these teachings, like Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts and people like that. They all had a big impact on the culture and on me personally.
Sure. Wait a second. Dave, are you back from Wisconsin?
I'm back. Actually, I'm not in Wisconsin, but I grew up
Michigan,
there.
right. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, very good. It's true. And so we're chatting with Philip. He's in studio with us today. And can you perform for us? Do you have your guitar set up?
I wasn't aware that I needed to be performing for us today.
Oh, well, okay.
I mean, I would be happy to, but I'm not in the studio, and I'm not really set up with a microphone to be able to sing for you.
Okay, so maybe some other time. And in that case, can you tell us what curtain music is, or kirtan music, if I pronounce it correctly?
Well, there's a couple of different perspectives you can come at it from. I learned it in an ashram in India, but my perspective these days is to look at it from the perspective of neuroscience. So the interesting thing about yoga and kirtan itself is they're not predicated on belief. They're predicated on experience. And so both yoga and kirtan, the devotional or ecstatic aspect of it, ask us to experience first and to use it as a process of inquiry. That looks different in an Indian ashram than it does in the West, in Los Angeles or any of the many cities that I play in. And because my perspective is to, I guess, be somewhat agnostic about it, what I'm trying to do is inquire of it and say, if I don't know anything about it, why does it still work? And so this has led me into a long process of investigating the underlying neuroscience of why it is that we look for bliss, and to see kirtan as a kind of technology of creating that experience on a mass level.
Mm-hmm. And you were studying in India a number of years ago, 10, 20 years ago, and you found it valuable, and you've continued to study.
Well, 20 years ago, my history briefly is that I went there to edit some films and ended up working for Swami Muktananda's organization and his successor, Guru Mai. I didn't know anything about yoga. I was a complete beginner, and there wasn't much to do when I wasn't working. The assignment was that they wanted me to edit years of Muktananda's speeches, talking on a variety of different spiritual subjects, and what I did was edit them down into short versions suitable for beginners. So it was an excellent education in Eastern philosophy for me, and we would chant every night. I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't interested in yoga, and yet it was powerfully effective. And that is what got me started in the process of, I'd been a musician on an amateur basis, never professionally, but that's what got me investigating it as a modern means of communication and as a kind of a mass participatory art form. And in some ways, I found it to be incredibly modern because it puts the emphasis on the role of the participant instead of a passive kind of art in which people just listened to it and took it in. The crowd itself is the instrument of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And
so that makes it utterly unironic.
Okay, that's okay. That sounds like fun. I never thought of it in that way. And so is it mostly voice, or is it instrument, or just mostly voice? Is it devotional singing?
Well, there's two fundamental instruments, both of which are created by the human body. One is percussive, you can call it your hands, and the other is melodic, and that's your voice. So everybody's body is already musical. Everybody shows up already a musical instrument. So traditionally, they would use finger cymbals and very simple percussion instruments. Over time, kirtan has absorbed a huge number of influences ranging from Western classical, the tablas, the harmoniums that the British brought to actually try and teach Christian hymns to Indians. It's embraced acoustic guitars, electric guitars, synthesizers, harmonies, and it has resolved them all into one. It's actually, from an ethnomusicological perspective, really a mighty river and a very, very much alive folk art form.
Oh yes, folk art. Yeah, actually, that's a very sweet way to put it. It is really kind of a folk music, folk art form, is it not?
It is, in the sense of the way it's practiced locally. I mean, traditionally, people would do it in living rooms, in temples, wherever. With the rise of things like Bhakti Fest, you're starting to see some very, very sophisticated musicians get involved in it. But because it's always connected to a crowd singing back, it maintains a kind of a beautiful simplicity. Mm-hmm. How the chants develop is, if you want to submit that to analysis, is quite complex. All kinds of chord substitutions. I find that jazz musicians play it the best, but always the crowd has to be able to sing along, and so that keeps it focused in a very simple and folky way. We're also encouraging people to do this music themselves, and I've been on tour almost continually since 2000, and I've seen city after city all over the world develop local kirtan groups. Often they meet in yoga studios or in people's living rooms. But there's something, in a way, kind of punk rock about the ethic of it, because it says make music yourself. Take it into your own hands. This thing that you're seeking is inside of you.
That's a very interesting and apt analogy. I, being older than you, no doubt, I would see it. I precede punk rock by fully a generation, so it's more like folk music to me, because it wasn't so much the question of musical ability as, Ray, to hang around with your peers and just kind of have a good time, as I remember early folk music, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, in a way, punk rock was never really about musical ability either.
No, not so much.
What it was, the emphasis is really just connect.
Yes.
Kirtan, though, avowedly is using the crowd as an instrument. I mean, I like to think of it as like I may have 5 or 6 musicians playing with me, but I've got at Bhakti Fest a 3,000-piece choir, which is an amazing thing. And what's funny is that all of us suffer, I think, often from this delusion that we're somehow in this alone and that we're somehow separate. When you sing together, you get a visceral experience of how we're connected and also how it is that we change each other's awareness. I've had the experience so many times that I might not be in the best mood, but somebody in the crowd is extremely ecstatic, and that is highly contagious. So it turns out that a few committed individuals can essentially light a little match that sets everybody else on fire. It's a very transformative act. Without getting into any theology or philosophy, when I sing, I always end up feeling better.
Excuse me, Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, we had a little bit of sound like there was water in the background. Are you out on a boat somewhere?
No.
Okay, very good. Now it's nice and clear now. Okay.
Yeah. the thing is that kirtan is ultimately a very... Go ahead.
No, we're listening to you.
Oh, okay. Kirtan is ultimately a very transformative act on a mass level. Whatever you come with, you can throw at the chant. Singing always makes you feel better. It's incredibly therapeutic. And so in many ways, that's what I invite people to consider. There are many, many layers of philosophy that are represented by this, and at Bhakti Fest, many, many, many different styles, many different perspectives ranging from deeply religious to avowedly agnostic, all of which resolve into a common experience. To be musical is to transform, I guess, the heavy stuff of your life into something that's ultimately light and accessible. It's almost like a way of speaking, of experiencing the truth of Einstein's maxim that matter and energy are the same thing. We're converting our emotional heaviness into spiritual lightness.
Well, that sounds good. Well, Dave, and do you have any CDs out you would like to mention to us?
I have 6 CDs, Brink, Japa, Mala, Divas and Devas, Joyride, and Yatra in that would be in chronological order. They're all easily accessible via iTunes, Pandora, Spotify. Or if people want to come to Bhakti Fest, there would be that and many, many more CDs for sale. I have to urge your listeners that if they've never experienced something like this, you sometimes have to take one little step toward it, and then there will be 1,000 steps toward you. There's a style of this that is going to be completely intoxicating to so many people, and it's one of the easiest, happiest, most loving festivals I've ever been to.
Well, Dave, thank you for calling in. I appreciate it very much. Dave Stringer called in. Thank you. And Dave will be performing, I believe, at Bhakti Fest, September 6th through 9th, here in California at Joshua Tree Retreat Center. Should be very much fun.
That is Friday night, September 7th, 9 p.m.
Very good. Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much.
Great to talk to you.
Thank you. We are here today. This is Josh Lane. You're listening to us on the LA Talk Live radio network. I'm in studio today with Philip Goldberg, author of American Veda, who also will be lecturing or giving a performance. I guess a performance is very fair. You know, people people like presentation. People like spoken word, kind of a chautauqua. You know, kind of a 21st century chautauqua with music.
That's right, with Beatles music.
Music and colorful costumes. It should be very much fun.
In the audience.
Very much fun. May I ask you, Phil? Do you think you and I being of a certain age, is the audience for your thinking about Veda, the information you offer about Veda, is it strictly boomers who have the greatest interest?
No. This one of the interesting things is, this has been going on, this sort of transmission of certain kinds of information, whether you call it spiritual or secular, from India to America for over 200 years. Mm-hmm. So it begins with Emerson and Thoreau being heavily influenced, and all the way through the baby boomer generation. As we talked earlier about the impact the Beatles had. Well, they had that impact because the baby boomers responded.
Yes.
And the baby boomers set the stage for it with all the exploration and the rejection of conventional thought and attitude. So there was a ripening that led to this watershed moment of an explosion of interest in Indian spiritual teachings and yoga and philosophy and so forth. And so that was huge. But the subsequent generations are also heavily involved. Most of the people at Bhakti Fest will be probably the children of boomers. They'll be in their 20s, 30s, maybe 40s. And so it tends to skew young, partly because of the venue and the whole sort of Woodstockian adventure part of it. But the yoga studio, the influence has been progressively accelerating all these years, especially since the 60s, but it takes different forms. Mm-hmm. So kirtan is, back in the 60s, there was very little of it.
Yes.
It was the Hare Krishnas mostly that sort of most people associated with that, and they just were seen as sort of strange strange. But now it's very mainstream. And as Dave was pointing out, you can look at kirtan as a spiritual practice. You could also look at it as a secular thing that makes has a certain effect on the nervous system and makes people feel good, and is communal. And so there's different ways of looking at it. So the kirtan form and the hatha yoga form of the physical aspect of yoga has come into the fore. And that they seem to be especially appealing to the younger generations. Whereas in the boomers' days, when we were in our 20s and 30s, it was a different set of gurus who were popular, and it was a different sort of emphasis. It was mostly about meditation and knowledge and understanding. And then so things shift all the time. And it wouldn't surprise me if the kind of scientific research that has been done on meditation and hatha yoga will be extended to kirtan. As Dave was talking about it as a neurophysiological phenomenon. You can probably see studies of it within 5 or 10 years to see what's going on in people's bodies when they do this.
So the ideas simply have become not exactly mainstream, but possibly almost mainstream and acceptance?
It's more than mainstream. If you look at, and the whole reason for American Veda, the premise behind it is that these teachings have seeped into the culture in such subtle and profound ways that many people have been influenced by them and don't even know it.
Give me an example. Give me an example.
Yeah, you might have a psychotherapist who studied with a guru in the 70s, and it changed the way that therapist understands the world and who we are and what we're made of and what our potential is. That therapist will do therapy different from the way a strict Freudian might, for example. Mm-hmm. And that will have an impact on somebody. They'll see themselves differently. It may be a course in comparative religion in college, and that person is much better versed in Indian philosophy than previous generations of professors. It may be a doctor who tells you to meditate or do yoga for a physical condition. So these things seep in, but it also affects people's attitudes about religion and spirituality. Without going into much detail, I would bet that most of the people at Bhakti Fest, if you took a survey of what their religion is, most of them would check the box saying spiritual but not religious.
So you get cultural progressives through there.
And that phenomenon of people having a serious spiritual life without identifying with a specific religious tradition or being boxed in by it is a very new phenomenon, and it's the fastest growing category in religion. And I contend that the availability of yogic practices has made it possible for people to have a genuine spiritual life without being limited by conventional religious forms.
I see. But of course, if I was a Southern Baptist, I would not be happy with that orientation.
No, you might be rather upset by you might picket Bhakti Fest, which I'm sure would be a great thing for Bhakti Fest because it would be great publicity.
So really do represent kind of people who might be at Bhakti Fest at Joshua Tree next weekend, progressives in general.
Probably. I mean, I haven't done a survey, but
yeah, I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying that obviously your book American Veda, there are still people who would be very unhappy with the whole process, right?
There are people.
I mean, Billy Graham.
Yeah.
It's still not real thrilled with you.
Let's put it this way: people who think their religion is the one true truth,
yes,
would not be happy with eclecticism in spirituality in general. Right. And they would see something like yoga or Bhakti Fest or meditation forms or gurus as false religious teachings that are a threat or the work of the devil.
Yes.
But there are fewer and fewer such people in the world, Josh, and I think we're better off.
Okay, good. Thank you. We are here in studio today with Philip Goldberg, author of American Veda, a very nicely done book that I think you'll find very worthwhile. And Philip will be appearing this weekend at Bhakti Fest, September 6th to 9th, 2012, out in Joshua Tree, California. And we'll be right back with Philip after these important messages.
Bottled at the source since 1871, Mountain Valley Water is the deepest operating spring in America. This naturally alkaline water, with a perfect blend of minerals, has a crisp, clean taste that's twice been named best tasting water in the world. Mountain Valley Water has been served in the White House for 13 presidents, but it's also served kings including Elvis Presley, whose only requirement on tour was 2 6-packs of Mountain Valley Water. Delivered to your home or office in glass bottles, Mountain Valley Water will give new customers in Southern California their first 2 5-gallon bottles free. For more information, call 1-800-499-9982 or visit us online at www.mountainvalleywaterla.com. Mountain Valley Water is the official sponsor of Here's to Your Health with Josh Lane on LA Talk Live.
Walk, run, climb, play. Solgar number 7 can help. Feel the difference for yourself. Solgar number 7 actually shows improvement in joint comfort within 7 days. Now you can start to get back on track fast and pursue the activities you love. Solgar number 7 is a breakthrough in joint care with no glucosamine and no chondroitin. The advanced bioactives in Solgar number 7 help to increase flexibility, mobility, range of motion, and actually shows improvement within just 7 days. 1 capsule once a day is all you need. When stiff joints occasionally say no, Solgar number 7 says yes. Visit Solgar.com and learn more about Solgar number 7 today. That's www.solgar.com, www.solgar.com. Solgar number 7, official sponsors of Here's to Your Health with Josh Lane and LA Talk Live.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute, Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
We're back. You're listening to Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live radio network, and I'm your host, Joshua Lane. In studio, chatting today about Bhakti Fest, taking place next weekend in Joshua Tree, here in Joshua Tree, California. Philip Goldberg is here, author of American Veda, a very nicely done book. Who's the publisher on that?
Random House.
Random House. So
Harmony division of Random.
So Random House, which is a major house, thought that people are interested in this subject.
Yes, they did.
By the way, how's the book doing?
We'd love it to be doing better. Maybe now we'll get the Josh Lane bump.
That's right. Oh, yes. And next you'll be on the Today Show.
That's right.
No doubt. No, actually, on some of those other real popular shows, they think they might still be afraid of your book. Would they not? They still afraid?
Well, I don't know. I have no idea how the producers of those shows think.
Right.
You know, you have. Right. I mean, Oprah meditates, and she has people talking about yoga all the time.
Oprah does. Oprah's been very much open to these ideas.
Sure. So it depends.
All right. Let me then ask you about specific teachers from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Mm-hmm.
The teacher once known as Guru Maharaji had enormous influence.
He did. When he first came, he was 13 years old.
Right. The 13-year-old spiritual master.
Yes,
right.
And he was called the 13-year-old perfect spiritual master, something like that, and had a big impact for several years, and one of many in the 70s, and then decided he didn't like being seen as the Messiah of the world and all the stuff that went with that, and married an American woman, and I discovered when researching American Veda, he's been teaching all these years as Prem Rawat, which is his real name, and travels the world teaching in a business suit and raises his family and children in L.A. area, and continues his work.
Yes, he does.
Yeah,
he does.
Without the sort of cultishness
trappings
of the early days. Yeah.
Right. Shri, are you there?
This is Sridhar calling.
Shri, hello, Shri. Are you calling in from the desert? Shri, hi. We can hear you now. Are you calling in?
I'm calling in from the site. We're building a city down here in Joshua Tree, California.
That sounds very good. I think they did the same thing in Woodstock a long time ago. Kind of sounds like the same energy here, really. I'm glad you're calling in.
Yes, I have around 50 people on site. We're putting up tents. We're building a stage. We're putting the shade cloth so everybody will be covered by shade. We're installing porta potties for everybody, showers. It's fantastic.
It sounds very good. It sounds very good. And once again, where is that festival, and what are the dates?
We start on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock, and we don't finish till Sunday night, 6th to the 9th, in Joshua Tree, California. It's a quick 2 hours east of Los Angeles, off of Highway 10 at the Joshua Tree Retreat Center.
Very good. And
beautiful location.
And people get tickets at the door. How do they get tickets?
Well, as of now, the online tickets are all finished, and they can just come and register, and there's still some discounted tickets, of course. They mentioned they heard it on LA Talk Live, and they're going to get $50 discount.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you, Shri. That's very kind of you. That's very good. And I understand, are the Stones going to be there this year?
Excuse me?
Are the Stones going to be there this year?
The Rolling Stones, they had another engagement, but they promised me for next year.
Okay, very good. That's very good. Okay, so we'll look for the Stones next year. And so I guess the next year also with the Stones, the Angels will be doing guarding. Is that it? Next year, the Angels and the Stones together?
Absolutely. The Rolling Stones will be pushed by the Angels.
Very, very good. That's very, very good. So
we're having a great time here, and love for everybody to come down. There's plenty of places to camp. We have camping for 2,000 people, and we're expecting a crowd of around 3,000 people this weekend.
It sounds like fun. It sounds very worthwhile. And some of your performers, Wah will be on stage as well?
Yeah, Wah is flying in from New York. We have Krishnadas coming in from New York. Shamdas is flying in all the way from India. We have some great speakers, such as Phil Goldberg, who's on your show today.
Yes.
Which is first time with us. We're really looking forward to welcoming him. And we have Ram Dass is being piped in from Maui, and Radhanath Swami just flew in from Mumbai, India. So we have people coming from all over the world.
It sounds like a very worthwhile and fun event. And you have these also in Madison, Wisconsin, do you not?
We have Madison, Wisconsin, next July 4th, 2013. And we're going to have another one of these in May of 2013 down here as well.
Very good. Very good. Very good. Shri, I'll let you get back to work. Thank you for calling in. And hopefully many listeners of LA Talk Live will attend your Bhakti Fest this weekend, September 6th to 9th, out in Joshua Tree, California. Thank you, Shri.
And if they want any more information, just check our website, bhaktifest.com.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was Shri. Shri is the founder of Bhakti Fest, and as a very young man, you may have seen him in the director's cut of Woodstock. He was bringing Swami Satchidananda onto the stage, and so Shri has been doing this since he was a very young man, and now he's an older man in good health, and he's doing Bhakti Fest. Have you been friends with Shri forever?
No.
No, just met him?
But I know him by reputation because of, I had to, in researching American Veda, one of the things that I wrote about was Swami Satchidananda and his contribution with his integral yoga and his appearance at the Woodstock Festival, which was another one of those great moments of East meets West.
And why was it a great moment? Was it a lot introduction to a lot of people who had no idea who this was?
Yeah, I mean, Woodstock was a rock festival, and we all know what it became in legend and history. But when the organizers saw what was developing and the numbers of people coming and the potential for chaos, I think it was Sridhar that had the idea to spiritualize the opening. And,
good for him. Smart idea.
And so they helicoptered Swami Satchidananda, who was very popular at that time, this is 1969, in New York City. And they helicoptered him up, and he opened the festival. There's pictures of him, and there's one in my book as well, of him addressing the 400,000 people before the music, the rock and roll started, with a very inspiring sort of East meets West speech, and concluded with some Sanskrit chanting, which in a sense was a prelude to Bhakti Fest, because Bhakti Fest is 24/7 Sanskrit chanting, which is what kirtan is. So there's a kind of link with Woodstock in the spirit of it, and with Sridhar in particular.
I guess sometimes, having been a much younger man at Woodstock.
You were there?
Yes. I guess I took a lot of all that for granted. I didn't realize how difficult it was to change people's opinion about anything. And I simply took all the spiritual teachers for granted as being like, why, of course. It was just kind of like, of course. It was like, I didn't have a problem with it. I didn't feel that my spiritual background was in any way threatened, although my parents were not thrilled. And none of the parents were thrilled. And I couldn't understand it at the time. Now I'm an older man, so I get it. I get it more, because their experience with organized religion was very different. A very different experience with what organized religion meant, and how, in retrospect, might be unkind, but how provincial the world was before the United States was able to defeat Germany and Japan in the Second World War, and that we boomers, born after 46, had a very different experience because of our education, our affluence, and the freedom that we had in the United States, which our parents didn't have as much access to.
That's right. And I'll add one other thing to that, because when we came of age, it was also the beginning of mass communication and travel, and that gave us access to a more globalized vision of the world.
Yes.
And also there were other factors, entering into it, but all of that played into this incredible receptivity to new ways of thinking, new ways of being, new ways of experiencing the world. There was this thirst and hunger for answers to the big questions of life, and new ways of living in the world. And the Eastern teachings came to us at just the right time, and the ease of access, with gurus being able to come from India easily. There were even changes in immigration laws in 1965 that added to that. So Asians started to immigrate here and so forth. And people could get on a plane and go to India and go study at an ashram, like following on the Beatles' lead.
Right.
And so everything was ripe for that. But one of the things that people should bear in mind is that while a lot of traditionalists saw these introduction of Eastern teachings, and that would include the Buddhist teachers who came, as a threat, in truth, one of the reasons they've caught on so much over the decades and a couple of centuries, is that they're really not a threat to other religions. And none of the gurus ever asked anybody to convert to anything. It was all, these are practices, whether it's kirtan as being featured at Bhakti Fest, or yoga or meditation, these are ideas and practices that you can fit into your way of life, whether you're an atheist or a Christian or a Jew or whatever, and they will deepen your experience of life, whatever your orientation. And so there's been a big shift in Western religion, in conventional religion, that has been stimulated by access to these teachings. You now see Christian meditation, Christian chanting, Christian yoga, Jewish yoga. There's a guy who's going to be at Bhakti Fest called the Kirtan Rabbi, and he is a rabbi. And he has been influenced by these teachings and practices from India and integrated them into his own spiritual orientation. So he does traditional kirtan-style chanting, but in Hebrew.
Oh, I see.
Instead of Sanskrit. And that kind of integration, that kind of synthesis is very common, and you see it very commonly among young people. And so there's a kind of transformation of spirituality in general taking place in America that was stimulated by the access to these Eastern teachings.
Here's an idea that as a young man suddenly dawned on me. I'm Jewish, and so when Jews die, my father was Orthodox, the Jews sit Shiva for the dead. And as soon as I heard that, and I said, Dad, this must come from another religion because Shiva is the god of the dead. And my father looked at me, and my father said, it's possible. And I thought I made a connection there. I thought, well, listen, Jews sit Shiva for the dead, and Shiva is the god of the dead. Not a Jewish god. Jews just have one god. And my father looked at me and he thought, okay. My father actually listened to me on that one, and I thought, oh my goodness, my father listened to me. It was a nice moment, really. What do you think?
Oh, there's a lot to be said for that.
Right.
The first one is, where did you get the name Lane? But we won't go there.
My father actually changed his name.
Yeah, of course.
Worldwide anti-Semitism at the time, really.
Right.
Oh, sure. Oh, yes.
But no, there's a lot to be said for that. I was in India once, and someone heard my last name and said, "Oh, you must be a Hebrew." And I said, "Well, that's my heritage." And he said, "The Jews are the Brahmins of the West."
Oh, that's a lovely statement, isn't it?
And I thought of that. So you can ponder that for a while.
It's very lovely.
And people have made links between Hebrew and Sanskrit. There's not just the one you saw, the Shiva, but Brahman, which is the Sanskrit word for the one reality, the ultimate reality, you could say God, and Abraham. People have made those kind of links.
That's
I don't
nice.
know, and there are linguists who say that the vibratory quality of Hebrew is very similar to the vibratory quality of Sanskrit. These early languages, and which brings us back to chanting and kirtan and bhakti fest, because one of the ways that the Eastern teachings, the traditional Vedic or Hindu teachings have been presented in the West, and one of the reasons they've been easily acceptable and assimilated is you can look at them in secular and even scientific terms. So these sacred sounds called mantras, you could look at them as devotional and religious, or you could look at them as vibratory qualities, the sound qualities of these mantras that are chanted in kirtan or used internally in meditation, can be looked at scientifically as sound vibrations that have a certain effect. And when Dave was talking before about the quality of what happens in this call and response chanting with a big crowd like at Bhakti Fest, there's a vibration that's set up by the human voice. And the vibration of chanting certain sounds would be different from, say, singing "I Can't Get No Satisfaction," or other English terms. There's a vibratory quality, and the repetition of it has an impact on the brain and the nervous system. So that's why people feel good. That's why it feels ecstatic or just nice. These things can be looked at in that way, and these ancient teachings where sound is used, whether it's Sanskrit or Hebrew or Latin or whatever, should not be underestimated in terms of their psychophysiology. They don't have to be seen as religious.
What about Orthodox Hindu people who are Hindu from India? What do they think of this American phenomenon? Do they find it? Is it fun for them? Are they happy? Has it been bastardized in their opinion? I mean, what is their thinking?
It's a really good question, Josh, and there's no one answer.
Right.
And I have a lot of very dear friends in the Hindu American community, and people in that community, I'm happy to say, are very happy about my book. And they're proud of the impact of their traditional teachings on America, because many of them didn't know the extent of it. And when they hear people like Emerson and great icons of American life were influenced by these teachings, it means a lot. And so there's a certain pride, but there's also a concern. And it's not just the Indian American community, but even many of the leading yoga teachers are concerned that in the process of adapting these teachings to a new culture and a new language and a new way of life in modern America, there's always an adaptation. Even the earliest gurus who came here, like Yogananda and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, they were always adapting the teachings to this new culture. And there's always a bit of a danger that you can dilute or corrupt the purity and the essence of these teachings if you're not too careful. So there is some concern and there's some cynicism by some people especially when yoga becomes synonymous with sort of a fitness exercise or an exercise in vanity instead of being seen for the larger context. I know a lot of Indian Americans who love the kirtan phenomenon, and that would take place at a place like Bhakti Fest. And others who are concerned that, it's getting too rock and roll-y. But everybody recognizes that tastes change. And even in India, the forms that kirtan takes on change over time. As Dave said, the traditional use of the harmonium in chanting kirtan. I mean,
harmonium,
the harmonium,
a small little musical instrument.
Yeah, that looks like a little accordion with a keyboard, but it's stationary. And that was introduced to India by the Brits. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. And so everybody adapts these forms, just like George Harrison and others use the sitar in rock and roll, But there has to be a certain kind of vigilance in not corrupting the teachings at the same time you're adapting them. And I think most Indian Americans are aware of that and participate in that.
In almost every early movie that was done by Woody Allen, there will be a gag scene in which the Krishners are in a someplace harassing him a little bit. But by way of sheer numbers, how many Krishners were there in the 60s and 70s, and how many Krishners? I was like 2,000 of them. How many Krishners are there around?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer in terms of numbers. The Hare Krishnas in the 60s and 70s were the most sort of obvious.
They were hardcore.
Yes, and they were. Well, you could say that that was almost a sort of more orthodox Hinduism, and the outer trappings that the Hare Krishnas, especially in those days, had. They were very visibly Indian. They had the Indian and Hindu accessories and so forth, and most people saw them as a kind of nuisance or in the streets and as a cult. But in truth, they represented a traditional form of devotional Hinduism, and over time they too adapted, and they realized they have to have a different presentation in the world. They can't annoy people in airports like they were in the 60s and 70s. And many of them, they all grew up. They had children. They had to get jobs. So their appearance changed, and they're still there. I mean, there's many Krishna devotees. I know 3 or 4 of Krishna devotees from the 60s who are
still
yes, and they are in their private lives, but they're teaching in college or selling insurance or whatever they do, and so it too has adapted and evolved.
But by sheer numbers of people, it's a very small number of people.
Yeah, you would certainly compared to the number of people who practice Hatha Yoga or who practice transcendental meditation or any of the others. But each of the main lineages that came here, the TM, attracted millions of people. Yogananda attracted, millions of people.
Yes.
But most of them attracted smaller numbers. But And that kirtan is attracting, 3,000 people at Bhakti Fest and people at yoga centers
and that's a nice
all over
turnout,
the country.
3,000 people.
It's a huge. Think of it.
Very lovely. It's very lovely. Yes.
Think of it. It's only a tenth of what came to Woodstock, but they'll be more comfortable.
That's very good. That's very good.
But that was a once in a lifetime or a once in a century phenomenon.
Yes.
But think of it: 3,000 people going out to the high desert for 4 days to chant and do yoga and listen to people like me, and there'll be professors there giving talks and yoga classes and all kinds of things. It's a pretty amazing phenomenon when you think of it.
And do you see what you're doing now as a direct offshoot of what people like Allen Ginsberg and Alan Watts were doing in the 50s and 60s? Is there a big parallel?
Yes. I call, there's, as I was saying, there's a lot of different expressions of these teachings that came here. So Dave Stringer mentioned Swami Muktananda. We've mentioned Satchidananda. We've mentioned the others. And each of them had their own sort of angle on these teachings. And, because the Vedic teachings, the yogic teachings are very multifaceted. And they attracted different kinds of people. But I look at it because of American Veda, I see that it's like one big, what I call a Maha lineage, a great lineage of these teachings.
What's that term?
Maha lineage. Maha means great.
I see. That's a Hindu term?
Yeah, it's a Sanskrit word. And so there's taken together, there's this series of influential people, Emerson and Thoreau, and then Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts and Allen Ginsberg and all this. In fact, if you go on YouTube and Google Allen Ginsberg on William F. Buckley's talk show, you'll see probably the first televised kirtan moment.
Really?
When Allen, in 1968, takes out a harmonium and does the Hare Krishna chant for Bill Buckley, and it's worth doing just to see Buckley's face.
Right. Yeah. Buckley.
So we're all in this lineage, and yes, so Bhakti Fest is a continuation of that. And what seemed strange when the Hare Krishnas were chanting in the streets got a little less strange when George Harrison recorded an album of their chants. Yes. And now is much, it's something people do at yoga studios or at Bhakti Fest.
And the yoga exercise school phenomena and the yoga schools, luckily we're in California, they're everywhere. I see that as a good thing, not a bad thing. And obviously, if it is exercise, which it is, people can then either graduate to other things or just stay with the exercise. The exercise is a dynamite exercise. People really feel better.
That's right.
And that really, our generation, I think, is responsible for that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there were yoga teachers earlier, but they were small in number. And then after the Beatles, a lot of the other teachings, they put meditation on the map. But as a result, there was this big opening. So people like Swami Satchidananda and Swami Vishnudevananda, and then later Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois. So they emphasized more of the Hatha Yoga physical practices, and they started training Westerners to become teachers. And they started opening up studios, and the whole thing grew. And similarly, those exercises were meant originally to be sort of exercises you did prior to meditation, but they have value in and of themselves for health and well-being, and that got emphasized. And now you see, yoga studios next to Starbucks everywhere in
That's
the
right.
world.
That's right. Which, once again, I think that's a good thing. For those of you just tuning in, you're listening to Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live. I'm your host, Josh Lane, and in studio today with us is Philip Goldberg, author of a very excellent book called American Veda. And Philip is going to be speaking this weekend at the Bhakti Fest out in Joshua Tree, California.
I'm on Thursday, by the way.
He's on Thursday. He's on live. And we will be right back after these important messages.
We know there are many choices in internet radio, and the staff and host of LA Talk Live would like to thank you for choosing the internet's hottest destination for the most eclectic sound and invigorating talk. This is LA Talk Live We are more than just talk.
My name is Jay Davis. Not only am I a Loyola Law student and advocate for the youth of today, but I'm a contestant in the Miss California USA pageant. My pageant platform is built around advocating for abused and neglected youth. And as a contestant in the pageant, I hope to make the community aware of how we can help. I'm asking that people please donate to my campaign to help fund my pageant needs. Donations can be made at GoFundMe.com/JDavisForMissCAUSA 2013. Even if you're unable to donate, please show support by liking the page, Facebook.com/JDavisForMissCAUSA 2013. Thank you.
We're back. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health. I'm your host, Joshua Lane, and you're listening to us today on the LA Talk Live radio network. And my guest is Philip Goldberg, author of a very nicely done and very interesting history book, actually, cultural history book, American Veda. Philip, where can we get your book?
Online, or Barnes & Noble, or Kindle, or any of the usual sources.
And has anyone reviewed your book favorably?
Everyone who reviewed it favorably.
And who is that? Do you want to mention a few?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Publishers Weekly gave it a starred review, which I was very happy about. The LA Times gave it a good review. You know, most of the usual sources, but the New York Times ignored me, unfortunately.
The New York Times would not review your book?
They didn't.
They would not.
But, you know, others, it's gotten very good reviews, I'm happy to say.
Well, that sounds excellent. And so you spend a lot of time interviewing people that you chatted with? And
I talked to over 300 people in doing the research for the book, yeah, and read till my eyes glazed over.
And it's a subject that you obviously enjoyed as a young man and felt this is worthwhile as a history.
And then it got to be much more complicated than I realized, and took much longer to research than I had planned on, because it's just so rich and so much information to be had. Because the influence of Indian spiritual teachings has permeated the culture in many ways that people don't realize, and I kept uncovering different layers as we went along.
It seems like a nice topic. And how can people get in contact with you?
PhilipGoldberg.com or AmericanVeda.com.
That sounds very good. And again, you'll be live on stage Thursday night?
Yes. I don't sing, but we'll have the Beatles.
Okay, that'd be good.
And Jim Beckwith performing with me.
All right, and you'll be out at Bhakti Fest
at
Joshua Tree, just September 6th through 9th.
One of many, many people who will be ecstatically entertaining the crowd.
That sounds very good. Thank you for tuning in today. You've been listening to us. This is Here's to Your Health, and I'm your host, Josh Lane. And you're listening to us today on the LA Talk Live radio network, and we'll be back next week. Thank you for tuning in.
For more information about the guests and sponsors of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, please call us at 818-707-0005.